Hello, I'm here today with the SSL Big Six, and I just wanted to break down a few ways that I've been using it in my home setup in an electronic music setting, specifically with techno. I've been really into techno these days. Using the Big Six or pretty much any other mixer in this sort of setting gives you that sort of dub approach. So having effect sends on each of my voices, I have reverb as well as delay. I'd also like to say right off the top that this video is not sponsored by SSL. This is just a piece of gear that I've had my eye on for a while. It's an approach that I've wanted to try out within my setup, and it just sort of feels like the next iteration creatively that I'm into right now. I knew that it would change the way that I produce music, and surprisingly, it also changes the way that I perform it, like I mentioned, that in that sort of dub setting. Is it something that I would consider using live at this point? I'm still kind of on the fence about it just because traveling with this unit, it doesn't feel like a live performance unit. There's also some cons of using it as a performance unit. I actually also own the Model 1.4, and which is specifically designed for performance, and it has all these little subtleties that make it perfect for that sort of setting. And here's a video for why it's great in a hardware hybrid sort of live setting. And if you'd like to dig a little bit deeper with a comparison, I've actually compared the Big Six to the Model 1.4 over on my Patreon. We'll just start by looking at how flexible the Big Six is in general, regardless of what type of music you decide to compose with. It's also worth noting that I'm coming from more of like a hardware production based sort of setup, so it's a little bit more unconventional. It's just not quite the same as using a DAW, although the Big Six would work really well in combination with the DAW as well. My approach has been very hardware based, so sampling hardware units, in particular drums, like techno inspired drums, running them through the Big Six, you know, sort of getting that analog quality. And then of course the Big Six is an audio interface as well, so that is directly routed into my DAW into multi-tracks. The Big Six is also great from a performing standpoint, so it's very much integrated into both of these worlds. In terms of the hardware that I'm using, the analog rhythm is definitely at the forefront. The TR-8S is also in the rotation for techno drums. Some of these channels are just routed directly into the Big Six. Some of them are routed all the way to the left here, sort of tucked away into individual effects pedals. The character or, you know, the modulation or whatever of that pedal is being printed directly into the track and into the Big Six. I have a pretty decent collection of pedals to choose from, and for drums I tend to lean a little bit more into like the textural side of things. Because my setup from A to B is almost 100% hardware at this point, I do end up with a bit more of that hardware sound. It tends to sound a little bit more old school, I would say, using a strong sequencer with hardware effects pedals into a hardware mixer. Or maybe my ear is just more attuned to old school stuff, so it ends up sounding that way. So I'll hit play on my analog rhythm. As you can see, I have some basic EQ going on here. A little bit of low end in the bass as well as high end on that kick. Right, so basic EQ, whatever I need to do, I have the option to do that right here. To the left here, I have my texturizing section. So generation loss, for example, let's mute everything except for this tom thing. So this is where I could add some flutter, failure, all this kind of stuff. Maybe change around the EQ on this in combination with the pedal. Let's say I like that. On my kick, I always run it through Dreadbox Kinematic. Let's solo the kick. This is without. And that's with. So it just has a little bit of drive to it. If I want to open up that high end a little bit or make it a bit more of like a low end muted kick, sort of. These hi-hats, as well as this thing going on here, this is running through the Empress ecosystem. So it's got like a little bit of a lo-fi slap flavor to it. As you can see, I love lo-fi pedals, so no surprises there. All together, let's hear what this sounds like. This is like a bass note on beat 1. If I turn on Roger that, it becomes something completely different. Like it's not even necessarily a bass anymore. Ooh, that's cool. Maybe EQ this a little bit differently. So now it's turned into more of a texture than an actual bass. On top of this, I have some panning going on here between these two. So this hi-hat is panned left and right. Just little baby steps to polish this. Obviously the mix isn't really together yet, but this is where I come up with my ideas, drop them into my DAW, and then have a second listen to them. And at this point, mixing is not even really my focus. I actually outsourced that to my buddy Stereo Image, who has been on this channel a bunch. So it's sort of become like a team effort to get this multi-track thing going together. Oof, turn that off. That's something that I've been working on a lot, like putting together a techno drum starter kit. And this is the workflow. This is how I've been doing it. As for an even closer look at the Big Six in this context, you've got your 4 super mono channels right here. So this is like the highest quality audio, these 4 channels. This is where I usually run my lower end drums through. So kick, bass, snare, maybe a tom, and sometimes rim. I find that a rim sounds really good through a high quality preamp, especially when it's analog to begin with. Like that EQ on the kick, let's take it off. You really, if you're not wearing headphones, you're not gonna hear that, but you're really getting that extra oomph. Maybe give it some high end as well, take out some mids, right? I have a little bit of compression on the kick as well. And this is what makes the Big Six so flexible. You're essentially using this as a mixer. You got a compressor in there as well. It's also an audio interface, so it's a hybrid version of those two things. All of the character from here, the compressor, everything here is being printed into your DAW on top of having, let's say if you have a hardware effects pedal, drop it multi-track style into your DAW. What you can do is maybe reroute the multi-tracks that you just came up with from your DAW into the Big Six. So what I've done here, I've selected audio from USB for all of the tracks, except for the last 2, because these are my effects ends. For me, in terms of like these little performance clips that I've been putting together, this has been a super clean, fun, quick setup. If you're a hardware person, you know how it is, right? Like setting up the hardware is a whole process within itself. So it's just nice to have everything software that you've come up with using hardware gear. So it has that sort of hardware sound and you're running it through hardware. So I have my reverb and delay sends on each track here. I'm just gonna play. You'll notice that this track is a lot cleaner than the example that we just listened to because it's all been mixed, right? This is just drums. And let's say I want delay. In terms of going into more depth on how I actually set this up with my DAW, there's a video on that on my Patreon. Here's a link to that, to my Patreon. I've been gravitating more towards using software effects in this sort of setting because you just have so much more flexibility. You could add as many plugins as you'd like onto a bus, and everything is just like that much more accessible. Outside of that, in a depth setting, you have the simplicity of muting and unmuting tracks. Again, if you want to, you still have access to the EQ. You could pan stuff. That's all going to be printed into your master track, as well as the effects ends. It all gets summed up into one track. On top of that, you have this classic G series SSL bus compressor. This is such a good compressor. It just glues everything together so nicely. So when I'm doing these little performance clips, I always have this on just a little bit to kind of suck everything together. And of course, I'll give you an example of how that sounds. But before we get into that, let's talk about today's sponsor, DistroKid. If you're here watching this video, there's a very good chance that you're into producing music. If you're looking for a way to officially distribute that music, go with DistroKid. They are just the best option to go to, especially if you're an independent artist or producer like myself. Let's look into a few reasons why DistroKid is awesome. In terms of what's new, they recently released a smartphone app, which makes checking your important DistroKid stats Easy and accessible. The app is now available on Android through the Play Store. Essentially everything that you've been able to do on the DistroKid desktop app, you're now able to do through your smartphone. In fact, here's a list of key features that the app offers you. You might want to pause it now if you want to check them out. In today's day and age, we all know how many hats we have to wear as artists and producers. It can just be a lot, so write the music, produce the music. Then you've got to create content to promote it a few weeks before it's released. Then you've got to continue creating content after it's been released to promote it. It's a lot, and I'm not saying that DistroKid does all of this work for you, but they do make it a lot easier for us with the free promotional tools that they offer. The one I use most is Hyperfollow. It's essentially a free landing page or link tree. It's super clean. You could link maybe your latest video, your latest single, other important links you'd like to lead people to. I also use promo cards whenever I release a single. Just select the single that you would like to promote and it'll auto-generate a few different options for you to choose from. Go with DistroKid. It's just over $20 a year to release unlimited music to all major streaming platforms. You keep 100% of your streaming royalties. So many other tools that they offer for someone who's independent. They're made for us. And there is a discount linked in the description of this video if you would like to join. So about the SSL G series bus compressor, this is a must in this sort of context, summing everything up. So let's get a before and after of this. Let's hit play on the track. This is what we get. Turn it on. We're getting a little bit more gain, but also more pump. It just feels like it pumps more. Or bring this down. Getting a lot more kick. Yeah. It's a very tight mix. That's with it off, with it on. I never use the auto release. And then of course, let's get an example of this all together. I think that about sums it up. A lot of information in this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Glad to be here with you. Remember that there is exclusive content over on my Patreon. I also have a Discord, which I haven't mentioned in this video, where we go off about synths, and it's a forum, an open forum, very focused on electronic music, synths, just an overall productive experience in my opinion. Thanks again for being here and see you in the next one.